Welcome to the second hour of Kenya's biggest conversation this lovely Friday, 21st day of January 2020.
Thank
We're on
you.
the same
Forward.
Just wanted to confirm that. Yes, so we're going to have a conversation this hour about a budget ceiling, debt ceiling, how we're managing our finances, public finance management. We have a guest in the studio who will be joining us in addition to our guest host today, Wanjiru Gekonyo of the Institute for Social Accountability. But let's begin with the day's ulimi mkono proverb.
Yes, it's actually shimo la ulimi mkono haufutiki.
Now read it again now with proper punctuation.
Shimo la ulimi, comma, mkono, comma, haufutiki. The hole you dig with your tongue cannot be erased with the hand.
I have come round and I'm like,
Now you can see it.
This is a good proverb.
Wanjiru is a believer.
Yes. And I'm sure we can find some practical examples from our present political class. Let me just apply myself to that. Next hour, I'll have case study.
By 8 o'clock.
Case study.
And then by 9 o'clock, things would have been done. Wanjiru is throwing out these generous
very
compliments very early in the morning.
A good thing. We said even a clock that is broken is right 2 times.
It's 2022.
And that's not where I'm
Oh, no.
But the shimo can be something nice.
It can be.
It doesn't have to be something bad.
Let me tell you, I agree with you fully because I've just been referred to as a broken clock.
But it's right twice a
And
day.
I understand, but at least I'm right twice a day. At least.
Hey, I will not survive this one. Can we move on?
Dr. Abraham Rugo is our guest this hour. He is the country manager at the International Budget Partnerships Kenya. Dr. Rugo, thank you for joining us in the studio.
Karibu sana.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. And this is a promise I had made, so I had to be here. But it's really a pleasure to join you guys here and for the conversations that are here.
You've started the year on a good note.
Keeping promises.
Keeping promises.
Yeah. I mean, January is not yet over, so at least let me keep one resolution.
at least.
Yeah, but it's really.
At least you can go back and tick.
Yes,
Yeah?
it's, that one, nimefikisha.
When you hear that proverb
Yeah.
of ulimi, shimo,
Yeah.
comma,
Yeah.
comma. Did you get it immediately you heard it?
I struggled a bit the first time he read it. Then when he put the commas, it now came down, that basically that what you say with your mouth, you cannot try to come later, and practically I was just thinking about things that people pronounce, good or bad. And then later try to issue statements.
Clarification.
Qualifications, and certifications.
Yes. I actually meant. I did not.
I did not mean, I was misquoted and all those other things. Yeah, and I think it applies really in daily life, in practical life. But as I was saying, really, it doesn't have to be bad things. So I think the goal should be try and keep, say the right things, make the right promises. And now that we are going to be talking about budgets, basically tell wananchi what is practical and doable instead of cursing and sending messages of doom. I think we can send a message of hope.
So now that we're being hopeful, in June last year, we were told that we are going to spend 3.6 trillion shillings this year. And we were going to raise that from various quarters. And we were going to implement the Big Four. We were going to revive our economy from the ravages of COVID-19. We were going to have a better social structure in the country. Well, how are we doing?
First of all, is to say that 3.6 basically included some about 400 billion that we were planning to roll over, which basically is money we were saying we owe a few guys, but that one we are not paying. So the actual budget is about 3.2 trillion. We were making this against a promise of two things. One is that the agenda that had been set through the Big Four was clear, was crystal clear when you think about food security, manufacturing, housing, and healthcare. But I think it's right to say that we seem not to have been, from the very beginning of the Big Four, there was not much clarity, first of all, in terms of how far we are planning to go with this. if you take for example, the 4 the pilot cases, Makueni, Kisumu, Nyeri, I forget the last county, Isiolo of UHC, the report has never even been published of what did they find, what did they see. What I know is that counties were in protest because they were providing services, not getting paid and not getting reimbursed in that sense. But if you think about manufacturing is the big thing, but it's been declining in terms of its contribution to our economy. Yet we know very well employment creation, real income generation, and household incomes will not just come from agriculture. I know there is this whole fascination that because people are producing, because CT is producing sukuma wiki behind his house, he's a farmer, he's probably contributing to agriculture. But if he cannot sell that sukuma, if he cannot add value, which is the place of manufacturing, housing again was there. So what am I saying? The second assumption was that we were going to raise revenue. Ordinary revenue. Now, out of that ordinary revenue, we already had a gap of about a trillion bob. It was about 930 billion then, that we didn't know where to find the money from. And the assumption was that we were going to tighten things in KRA and be able to raise. So far, 2 things have happened. One is that actually KRA has surpassed its targets, at least as of September, and even December. But they've surpassed their targets by digging deeper in the pockets that are already available, which basically means they have tightened, of course, the tax even on fuel tax and all that.
But Terry,
yeah,
when you say tightened, what do you mean they've burdened the citizens more?
They have burdened those who are paying more. There are 2 aspects of it. So first of all, there is a general burden that is shared across board, because when you increase fuel tax, what you do is that you spread that across board. And it was part of the conditions anyway that the IMF gave, that you guys need to raise more taxes. Fuel prices shot by about 20 bob within a short while. That happened. But the expenditure side of things was not rationalized, because the expenditure side of things is still going up. So what happens is that one would expect that if you have a hole in your budget, then you set out to implement a couple of things, then you raise even some more revenue than maybe even what you had anticipated. You rationalize your expenditure a bit, to say, okay, fine, it doesn't look like we will be able to borrow as much as we had thought. Why don't we try? Because the challenge has been rationalizing of that gap.
Can you explain rationalization?
So the language, let me put this, the language that is even in our books of budgets has been the language of fiscal consolidation. Rationalization is to say, I intend to build a house of 10,000 shillings. Let me use that example. I have 5,000 bob. Now, because it is clear I am not likely to raise the 5,000 shillings and I still need to build this house, can I reduce the cost? Can I remove a few things of what I need to do? And at least, or can I use cheaper material? Because that's the language of rationalization. Whenever we talk about fiscal consolidation, that's it's a big language of saying, can we spend more efficiently? Can we spend on priorities? Can we spend on things that we must spend on? And that period, the big spending, in my opinion, was basically going to be COVID vaccines. Anything that helps you to reopen the economy.
Right.
That was going to be the big spending. We still haven't gotten, vaccines to the extent that we needed. I think the last time, I remember even Rugo was here and we did some discussion. We did about 34 billion or thereabout, but I think the total allocation was coming to about 14 billion, hoping the rest will be donated, as had been the case. So far, we are spending a lot on recurrent. But there's the other thing that I needed to speak about. They are the costs that we must incur, and that is the cost. We call it big language consolidated fund services. What does this entail? It entails 3 things. The debts we need to pay. We needed to pay a huge amount in this particular period. The total was coming to almost 1 trillion of how much we need to pay in terms of debt servicing. There's pensions. A language that a discussion that's often we are, growling over and hoping it will go away. But the truth is that the pension bill in this country is huge. I don't know for certain how much there are assumptions that if you were to put all the money that is owed to pensioners, including those who are being told to delay their going on pension because hakuna pesa ya kuwalipa, and you consider how much delays there are, you're talking of almost a bill of about 2 trillion in terms of the total amount. So what has been happening over the last couple of years, what we have seen is that the pension bill has more than tripled over the last about 6 years. Started about 50 billion, we are now at 150 billion.
It's compounding.
Yeah. Let me just use, it's grown 3 times. You see, those are mandatory expenses. But then we also have constitutional commissions and all that comes with that. Those are mandatory expenses. Well, that means before we pay for medical equipment, before we pay for vaccines, before we pay for agriculture subsidies, if any that we are providing, before we even pay for the roads, that is money that
We
must
must first get this money.
Yes. So yes. So the point connecting is that yes, you are raising more revenue, but a lot of that revenue is being taken to repay. So currently, out of every 100 bob we are raising, 65 of that, 63, 65 of that is going. So we are left with 35 shillings for everything else. You know?
There was this analogy you gave of the 10,000 shilling house.
Yes.
And the availability of 5.
Yes.
Given that in our situation we don't have 5, we actually have 3.
Yes.
Do we see any activity within the government that indicates that they are willing to build this house for just 3,000 shillings?
Unfortunately, no. And the reason I say this is because for all time, the processes that were supposed to help us use 3 seem to be getting frustrated. Let me start with the first one. The making sense of our good parastatals.
KQ and company.
KQ is just the big, the big guy in town. But you have all these parastatals. We have had like 3, if not 4, processes of trying to make sense of how do we consolidate parastatals. Abdikadir, I think, is the last report. Karaoke had done one under KEPSA. There have been reports. Some even brought together, you remember the major one was the agriculture one, parastatals, that were all merged into Agriculture and Food Authority. As we talk, before long, all the parastatals have gone back.
They went back into...
So what's happening, and those parastatals, when we talk about publicly guaranteed debt, a lot of that debt is with those parastatals. Starting with Kenya Airways, you have Kenya Ports Authority, you have Kenya Power and the Kenya Pipeline. Those are like the big ones, But then even as you come down, whether it's a coffee board, the tea board, the SISO board, then all these different boards. That's one big piece,
Okay. Let me understand what you're saying. Yeah. Yes, you mentioned the big parastatals.
Yes.
Now you say that the debt is nestled with these parastatals.
The publicly guaranteed debt is nestled. Then there is the debt that the national government takes in and of itself for the functions they need to perform.
The big four, for the road, for the
SGR, for the roads.
Expressway, blah,
so
blah,
now,
blah.
all the parastatals you mentioned, with the exception of Kenya Power, at some level are profit-making parastatals.
They are supposed to be profit-making.
No. They are profit-making parastatals. I'm not theorizing. I'm actually stating it as it is.
Like which one?
Pipeline.
Kengen.
Yes.
They make money.
They make money. True.
What happens at the port is obscure. So it's a bit difficult to figure out whether they make money or not. But it's a monopoly, so they ought to. All right?
Correct.
And they don't make 2 or 3 shillings. They make tons and tons of money. Now, when you talk about public guaranteed debt, explain that a bit.
So public guaranteed debt is that, so when you walk into a bank today and you want to take a loan, somebody needs to guarantee that in the event you are not able to pay, somebody else will pay. In SACCOs, we have guarantors. So your fellow members sign for you. In a bank, if you don't have, you go, take your title deed or your logbook and they say, in the event you are not able to pay to meet your debt obligations, we will come and pick that collateral and dispose it and repay ourselves. So what the government does is that it guarantees, because these are state-owned enterprises. So the government owns Kenya Pipeline as a state-owned enterprise. It's supposed to make its own money, but it's still owned by government. So in the event it is not able to meet its obligations, The government, the government of Kenya in this case is supposed. Now, where the game now becomes a bit difficult is one that, as you said, there's a bit of opaqueness in how the monies and the spendings and all that. I mean, look at example, for instance, Kenya Power and Lighting Company, which is in drama every day. If you just look at your sheet or your SMS when you buy your tokens, there is no reason why Kenya Power should not be performing very well. No, there's no reason, absolutely no reason, because for fact, this is a service that is consumed every day. Kenya Power should be playing. This competitor is Safaricom.
Right, and you pay for it.
Yes, you
even
pay.
If you don't pay on a daily, even if you're paying at the end of the month, you're paying for it.
Majority of us
Without
actually
payments,
pay
you're cut
upfront.
off. Yes,
We pay upfront.
Yes.
So with or without consuming, it's like airtime. You buy it upfront, whether you call or you don't. Whether you use power or not. But because of the corruption, and this is something that perhaps, part of the reforms that have been proposed, is that the parastatals have become havens of channeling off. When you look at the budget books, a couple of years ago, we used to have even audits that are very specific and how much money is going to each. Nowadays, we have lump sum transferred to other government agencies. And you see a lump sum of 10B. You get? And questions around, so what is going on in Kenya Power? Who are the people supplying this? What are the contracts? What kind of contracts are there? When you think about the costs, you read that report where the presidentially commissioned report said that some of the information could not be divulged by officials within Kenya Power. And it's the same story. There's even a bigger concern of ethnicization of these. Recently I was in a meeting and a friend of mine said that sometimes when you touch a parastatal, you're touching an ethnic group, because again, and this is documented. There's a report that shows NCIC did that just to show how much these have become like, CT becomes the person in charge of a certain sector. The CEO. Anakuja na watu wake. Anakuja na watu wake because and of course that plays in the so the point I'm trying to say is that there's still a lot of opaqueness in terms of we put in money into you as Kenya Airways, so we put money into you as Kenya Pipeline, but how much are we getting back in return? Because this is and that has been even the discussion with IMF of say, can we now just privatize these things completely, and say they are no longer state-owned enterprises? We have proper, PPP kind of arrangements. We know you provide us this service, and we pay you for that, or put them in competition. Britain tried a bit of that. Germany has tried. Put them in competition with private sector.
So, Dr. Rugo, what do you see? Because I think through what we've done, we've looked at so many gaps, so many holes, so many issues, right? Now, those two suggestions that we make, so we quit the monopoly, because that's what we're looking at now. A lot of what is being supported by government in terms of finances, then it turns out to be a black hole, and we don't see the end of it. And there's a lot of money then that is missing. Yeah. Or go the privatization route. What would we be looking at here? Because at the beginning, you said something else very interesting, is that what ends up happening is that government then goes back to the people who are paying tax. Not everybody. The people who had previously paid tax are the ones, exactly, out of 47, right? Yeah. The government comes back and tightens it a little bit more, and that's where they end up getting. But if you looked carefully, like you say, this is opaque, but if you were able to see, if it was transparent, you would then be able to see that all this money then that somehow disappears into this black hole would probably now relieve these 3 million people from having to tighten their belt anymore.
You're right. I think, in my opinion, I think there are two ways to go this. First of all, there is no way we are going to make progress unless we tighten the rule of law, because there is no punishment and there is no reward. Whether you perform well, take an example, KenGen. With all the geothermal, with all the wind power, with all the generation, the efficiency at KenGen, it seems just to be getting lost because some of it is not even being bought by Kenya Power. We have enough power as we talk, to reduce the cost of power maybe by 50-60%. You know, now Kenyan is doing a very good job, and they are doing their best, and we know it's one of the very best run. Parastatal. I mean, comparatively across board. But first of all, we need to fix that there must be a reward, but there must also be a consequence of running down an institution like that. Secondly, I think we must introduce competition. Yeah, I don't see any other way. We must introduce competition and ask Kenyans need to have an option of where to buy power. And this has been tried in other countries. It doesn't have to be that you must buy power only from Kenya Power.
But don't we see an example here of what happened with that? Is that you had, for example, communications operations that was not working, introduced the private sector with mobile telephony, for example, and then you saw that things began to work.
Yeah.
And then the resident monopoly saw, okay, it's either we try to do better or we shut down or catch up.
Yeah, so and you see that competition needs to be there. Yeah. But I think what we are not saying is that there's a bigger political space in which then it has to do with how a society governs itself. How, for instance, the role of parliament in this as a representative of the people. We sometimes try to almost excuse them. The role of the representatives and the government that we elect of the president and that, because in all these places that we keep talking about, leadership is central to these decisions. And all the times you've talked about in the past that we have had a situation where things are functioning, even within the parastatals that are functioning, leadership is at the center.
That's true.
Leadership is at the center. So we cannot excuse the role of leadership.
In everything, and accountability.
Yeah. So you're saying rule of law, competition, and leadership are the three essential ingredients?
They're the three, because when we, technically and legally, we have the frameworks. Because if it's in law, you can change.
Right.
But even when you look at the PFM Act, it does not in any way limit, the Constitution does not in any way limit, a progressive and a competitive space, where we can be able to provide a service, in a liberal market, as it were.
So the law is not the barrier, it's the failure of leadership.
Yeah.
This is the Situation Room. Eric Latif Ndu, of course, CT Muga, guest host, Wanjiru Gikonyo, and our guest this hour, Dr. Abraham Rugo, country manager, the International Budget Partnerships Kenya. Wanjiru, you had a burning question.
Yes. First of all, thanks so much, Dr. Rugo. This is great. We work together under the Okoa Uchumi campaign, and you're articulating some of the things we should be demanding. So the resolution to Kenya's debt crisis is rule of law, competition around these parastatals, and leadership. So these are the core aspects. I'd like to link that to two very important events coming up as Parliament is set to resume next week. One is there is a supplementary budget going to be under discussion. Of course, we don't have this, but I know the International Budget Partnership, of which you're the executive director, has been analyzing supplementary budget. So what would we want to see to begin to deal with the crisis? The other related issue is the discussion around the debt ceiling and the proposal to move away from the ceiling towards what they are calling a debt anchor. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this chimba ulimi shimo?
Alafu tutajaribu kufuta na mkono. No, thanks. So supplementary budget, what first of all are they? When we, our budget, the budget that we prepare, just like even at the household level or at a personal level, has two assumptions. One, that I am planning to spend on XYZ, and I'm planning to get an income on ABC, if I may use that. So you say, I'm planning to spend 100,000 and I hope to get 100,000. But two possibilities happen. The most desirable one is that you get 120, that then you have a surplus, where you say, now I was planning actually not to go on holiday, or I was going to buy my mom something. I'm going to buy my auntie, who is equally needy. That's the desirable. But the reality is that often you don't get the 100 bob. You get 80 shillings or you get 70 shillings. Now, supplementary budgets so that's first in terms of income. But secondly, the second assumption that we make is that the things we have planned to do will be the only things demanding resources in the course of the year. So, for instance, when we started 2019-2020 budget year, which runs from July of 2019 to June, we didn't know there would be COVID. So we had planned for a normal year. We didn't know that we would need to get into PPEs and all this testing and things like that. But then things come that completely shake up. Emergencies happen. So supplementary budgets are supposed to help us reorganize our budget fast. Either our expenditures have remained the same, but our incomes have completely gone down, and therefore we try and reorganize so that we don't finish the year on a deficit. Or some projects we had thought would make progress, of 50% or thereabout. By mid-year, we are still yet to issue a tender, and it's clear that this money is not going to be spent. So supplementary budgets are supposed to be done. But the challenge with supplementary budgets is that by design, which we are challenging, is that they are never public documents. So we see supplementary budgets after the fact. You see them, they are not, in fact, it's interesting because it's the only document in the budget process that is not public. But there's a good rationale that one would argue. The rationale could be, for instance, that because I have already approved the broader budget, you, the leaders, you, the government that we have given public trust, will act with good faith within the limits. Remember, we are saying that there's an emergency that has happened. Something has happened. You will reorganize the budgets within the limits of what was already prepared, and then you send to Parliament, where our representatives that we elected, so that we don't always have to make decisions, all of us at the same time, will. But what has happened is that then they have become the place where, and this is both at national level and county level, where basically things are reorganized with sometimes very limited rationale and good rationale for that matter.
For example?
Yes, I was coming to an example. So, for instance, we have seen situations whereby there are certain projects that are politically desired. We had a situation whereby, people went into a meeting. Basically, this was a discussion between the MCAs and their governor, and they agreed on other projects that were not initially in the budget. And then, therefore, what you see is that a supplementary budget is brought in and money is moved, to those political projects, as it were. Last year at the national level, we had spending. A lot of it was tied to COVID, and therefore we had supplementary budgets that were coming to correct what had already been implemented.
Right.
So basically, you're just coming to make sure that when the accountants come to audit, when the Auditor General comes to audit, basically they find that the books look forward. But it's not that this was done, forward-looking, in terms of analysis that we have said. So every quarter, the government is supposed to prepare the budget implementation reports. They're supposed to tell you that you are planning to spend on X, Y, Z, but you have not received the money, or this ministry is not spending as fast as was supposed to be spent, but these are the ministry there's a greater need. So supplementary budgets are not made public. And by not making them public, then it means that it is very difficult for anybody to make a contribution and say, hey, what you're planning to spend on this movement of money, should have been in a different way. What, for instance, should we be expecting in this current supplementary budget? One would say, for instance, in this supplementary budget, you would want to see more money being put to vaccinate as many Kenyans practically possible. You want to see more money being put in preparing the education systems and structures for upper secondary. Junior secondary. I think it should be called senior primary, but that's a discussion for another day.
I think they do too.
Because I don't see how a primary teacher will now teach secondary,
Yeah.
and Kupet and all those other guys. So you expect those kind of movements. At this particular time, you also expect a fast tracking in every way to some of the engagements around UHC, so that to open facilities, to employ more doctors and nurses, because then you have a situation whereby you still don't have facilities well equipped and things like that. Food. We've talked about food security, in every way. But that's what we expect. But what are we likely to see? We are likely to see more money going to preparation for elections. To IEBC, they have already complained that they don't have enough money to be able to register voters.
What's wrong with that?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but at a time when you are with the boss here the other day, one of the commissioners last week, when people are not too sure they want to register, so why should we push more money to force them or to convince them?
To facilitate their registration.
And is it an unseen event?
It's not an unseen
It's
event.
like I was about to ask, all those examples that you've given, Dr. Rugo,
Yeah.
none of them is an emergency per se.
Precisely.
The issue of, for example, saying let's vaccinate more people, we knew that we needed to vaccinate people, and that should have been in the budget. What supplementary, like you're saying, is reorganizing because of emerging issues. Nothing here is food and drought. You could say now that is emerging because now you can clearly see, okay, even the December rains have failed us.
Even though it was predicted.
But now we can see the gravity of it. You can say, okay, that it's a moving target. You can dedicate more resources into it. IEBC and an election, we knew there was going to be
They were going to be all that.
CBC,
Now,
UHC.
all of them are not an emergency, but this is how they have become. They become an emergency, which is almost by design, and we have seen this even at the county level. Please note that the deficit we talk about and the revenue targets. So you have a deficit of, you have a deficit of, say, I don't want to use billions. You have a deficit of 20 shillings. So what we have seen sometimes is you say, okay, fine, we can only collect 80 shillings, but we still need 20 shillings to be able to achieve our 100 target, to be able to incur our expenditure. Let's raise our revenue target to 90 shillings. You know very well the 10 shillings you cannot raise.
It's not coming.
This is practical. This is what has been happening.
Yeah.
So you find that the revenue projections give you a false picture of the true deficit. You get?
So you're hiding. You're deliberately hiding.
You are deliberately, and we have put this, and we've put this to Parliament, we've put this to National Treasury, that we don't think that some of the projections on revenue collection are realistic.
So they present the projections as a reality.
A rosy picture that tells you things are not too bad.
We can afford this.
We afford. You mean we can't afford? Who are you? But then along the way, for instance, we knew very well that we were going to spend about $1 trillion out of the collection of about 2 trillion in this financial year. Now, if you know you're going to collect about, you're going to pay at least 1 trillion will go.
You'll go into debt.
Into debt servicing, for a fact.
Yeah.
Then what you're left with is about 800,000
billion.
800 billion. If you add those two together in terms of how much you can collect revenue-wise, then you say you have about 2 trillion. But the budget is 3.2 trillion. You have 1.2 trillion
to find.
I've actually been puzzled. This one you have to explain to me because the ignorance sometimes can be a terrible burden.
Though it's bliss sometimes. You have less headaches.
I would like to move as far as possible from the bliss.
Agreed.
What prevents us from budgeting with the 2 trillion?
Okay, good. What prevents us from budgeting? Sasa, every project you see in this country, I will just say it bluntly, iko na wenyewe. We have been with the Parliamentary Budget Committee and asked them, why can't you suspend? Why can't you hold some of these projects for a later time? It is good we open the country to be usable and passable, but must we do all the roads at the same time?
All at once.
All at once? What's the rush? To make sure we do, must we try and roll out UHC and all these things at the same time? Or can we actually focus, and that's what, all these countries that we admire, they focused on certain economic zones, built them. The Singapores, the Malaysias, they are still building even as we talk. They finished one part, and the Dubai that many of us would like to travel to. They built one part. Once they are done with, and opened it up, they continue to date. They are still building,
or at least made sure that one thing
precisely
was working,
is done
right?
and
it's
done
finished.
well.
So that, for example, I hear what you're saying, and maybe if we're going along the same lines here, in order to say we can actually bring down the cost, right, by focusing on a certain thing. UHC, for example, you don't need to have it running in every county with everything. For example, one of the things that I remember we spoke with one of the, I believe it was the governor of Laikipia County, and he said, if we have running water, for example, in terms of infrastructure, can we beef up infrastructure so that you have running water? One of the pegs which is absolutely necessary for a proper medical process to run.
Water.
If you have running water,
You solved half the problem.
you solved half the problem.
Prevention.
For all these things that you eventually end up
Precisely.
spending
Precisely.
unneeded money
Precisely.
on. Right?
And the question we've asked, because I have been in these conversations, often we have asked, guys, why can't we
Freeze some things.
freeze some things for some time? CBC, did we have to roll it out across the country?
Nope.
We could have tested it.
Pilot it.
Even in the US, in one state and another state, you have different systems of education.
Sure.
What is important is, are these children working towards common goal? You know, so this rush to roll out everything, at the same time, and then secondly, it is clear also that even the rollout is at inflated prices. So you're trying to do everything, and at the same time you're doing it at inflated prices. Because let me ask you. So by June this year, we will have borrowed over 9 trillion. We'll have borrowed 8.8 trillion of the ceiling of. So this is official data from the Parliamentary Budget Office in a report they released a while back. 8.8 trillion.
We have borrowed.
This is equivalent that you basically have added 88 shillings to your 100 bob. Now, if you add 88 shillings, or your monthly, let me bring it down. So your monthly income is 100 bob. Then you meet somebody along the way, and he gives you or she gives you 88 shillings. What has happened is basically you have almost doubled your income for that month.
Yeah.
Two things are possible. One is either you're going to do something great that you will always remember, or you're going to spoil yourself in a way that you will again not be forgotten.
Or in a way that you will want to forget.
Yes, in a way that you will want to forget. So when you put 8.8 trillion in our economy of about 10 trillion GDP, which is the total wealth of, we should be seeing changes everywhere.
We should see expressways, 10 of them in the country. No,
We are
10.
seeing
10.
No, 10.
Are
They
you
are-
saying you can't say that?
We
You
should
can't
be
see
seeing
them.
10 of them.
At what cost?
We should have done the
No, I mean, Eric,
trillion
And that's where
8.8
that's where I
trillion
want to
what?
agree. I want to agree on something and also disagree on something else.
Yeah.
The issue of inflated projects,
Yeah.
that we have the projects at inflated costs,
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
But the pressure also to keep these projects, all of them running at the same time, is actually political pressure, not by the politicians, but by the citizens.
It's a combined thing. It's a combined
Because the people will keep asking, Uhuru hata kujenga, Uhuru alianza, Uhuru did not even do health. What did Uhuru do? If we come and say that, Uhuru did, he put in progress, and we are heading towards
But Eric, and this
food
has
security.
been, but in truth, is that this is a political hype that has been created, and everything is being done in the name of wananchi. We've at the International Budget Partnership, we've been supporting something we call budget dialogues, public deliberation dialogues. We call them budget cafes, simple name. What we found in those conversations is that wananchi are willing to trade off some things, because if they can be able to be assured that we will do this to completion. I'll give you an example. Water projects are a common challenge across board. And the reason why water projects are a challenge is because the stages that you have to go through before you get water, first of all, you have to do a feasibility study in many places. Now, Baringo is a unique place because in the lower sides of Baringo, Marigat, you have an area, huge sparse area, where you are between Lake Bogoria, a salty water lake, and Lake Baringo, a freshwater lake. Now, the feasibility studies have to be very carefully designed. But then what would happen, people go to these barazas and every village wants a borehole in their area. Then there's 10 million shillings. So what do the people say? Because we don't want to be taken to court, let's allocate to each of them 500,000, sorry. Now, 500,000 is not even enough for a feasibility, for a feasibility study. So what happens when the year is ending, they have all this money because nothing could be done in any of the boreholes. It's rolled over to the following. So what did they decide to do? They decided, fine, can we do a cost reference? Can we come up, you government officials, help us appreciate what is the total cost of getting this borehole done? So that when we go to public participation, these are the numbers we are working with. Now, and you find that people are willing to say, okay, fine, kama hivyo ndio iko, si basi tuanze na ule mradi. That one is more central. It will help more people. We'll still travel a bit, but let's get it done. Because we don't have these deliberations. We don't allow for space to converse. You know, we just come and say, oh, there is political pressure. Have we had a national dialogue? You know, I was challenging an education officer the other day. Why didn't we have a parents, a teachers, even a students dialogue on CBC?
Right.
For instance, you know, oh no, we consulted a couple of professors.
Direct power.
Because everybody appreciates, even at the household level, I have to sometimes sit with my children and tell them it's desirable to have a holiday of 2 weeks, but you can only afford so much. You know, it's desirable to do this, but you can only afford so much. That deliberation, I think, Eric, is going to be critical moving. And that's the reason why we establish institutions of representation.
you know, when you're talking about the issue of the boreholes, it's a unique situation in Baringo, but it is good for study and for reference.
Correct.
Because people talk of boreholes as though they're the begin and end all, which provide a lasting solution. They are not.
No. And maintenance costs too.
Can I jump
Yeah,
in?
please.
Because obviously it's going to wind us up very soon. The
fact,
question, I have a question.
Dive right in.
Questions. You have told us the deficit in the budget
Yes.
is being driven by interest, projects zina wenyewe, and inflated prices. But I want to ask the second question that we were to address today, if we have enough time, the debt ceiling. Is this an issue of concern that we move to the debt anchor? Will it help us? Are we indifferent? Or is it a problem?
The problem of debt in this country, and I think all of us appreciate, it's not a technical problem of being able to borrow or not being able to borrow, or being able to pay and not being able to pay. That's a secondary problem. The bigger problem is the kind of expenditure, the kind of expenditures we are incurring. It's a governance problem. Now, why I put it that way is because we have had, in the last 10 years, almost every year, we have had the deficit going up when revenues are not performing. Technically, you would argue that you expect revenues, if the revenues are not going up, you would expect in the course of the year during the supplementary budgets, in 1 year we had actually the deficit going up as much as 57%, which basically means you started with a deficit of 700 billion, you ended up with a deficit of 900 billion. And therefore, debt ceiling, even if today we agreed that the debt ceiling for this country is 15 trillion, in a couple of years we will be surpassing it. Because you see, this is money that is not necessarily, the kind of borrowing is not necessarily being primarily driven by what we intend to do.
Or even what we need.
Or what we need. It's driven by the fact that, you know, there are, and we can go into a lot of analysis, who lends this money, who are involved in the borrowing of the same, what are the kind of interests in there. But even if we were to put that aside, unless there is a clarity of what we are spending on, and that's why we've put a lot of this burden on parliamentarians. We have asked them, why don't you cut the deficit? Because when you cut the deficit, we had proposed a 50% cut in deficit. What you cut the deficit is basically when you go home and say, guys, I thought we will get 5,000 shillings for our visit up country. We only have 3,000 shillings. We are going to live with it because we are not going to walk up country. So we are going to either do less shopping or we are going to use public transport. We will not drive or whatever you decide on that. That leadership, that decision making is the solution. You know, we can change it to all manner of anchors, but unless the governance aspects of it, unless the rule of law side of it, unless common sense in leadership as Kipngetich used to call it, is what we are applying. And we are clear that we can face some of these things so that we are not trying to do everything now and here. Because what will happen is that even that legacy that is being sought will end up not being a legacy. Because then you leave all these things
On
hanging.
average.
Yeah.
What's the interest rate we pay on these debts?
So for the locally ones, we pay in the average of about 12-13%. Because those ones are short term, they are short term and
Commercial.
They are commercial. They're in common. They're in Kenya.
In Kenya shillings.
In Kenya shillings. The ones that are abroad because they are longer, we pay less. It's about 8% or thereabout. But because they are in foreign currency, when finally you work out the net present value, because of the shilling, depending on the fluctuation of the shilling, you end up paying much more.
You know why I'm asking this is, I'm actually getting the choice of the debts we choose to incur.
Yes.
I look at the debt that JICA and the percentage that they would charge in terms of interest.
Yes.
0.2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, so that's the question.
What's
What makes us decide on taking these
Yes.
expensive loans when there are loans that are cheaper?
When there are other
There
available.
are loans that are cheaper. First I will say interests, but after saying interest, we are now based as a middle income country, and there are loans we don't access.
Now we no longer qualify
We
for
no
some
longer
of those.
qualify for some of those.
You know,
We need
this
to close the
You know,
conversation.
this is a discussion for another day.
Yes,
Yes.
we will.
Jamaliza,
We
we just
will. We
started.
definitely will make it. But let me just say this as we come to a close. As a country, we owe it to ourselves to be able to be very firm and deliberate on the kind of development we want to achieve for our people. We now must stop mortar and brick kind of focus and move to services. Move to the quality of education, move to the quality of healthcare, move to the quality of different services, financial, technical, and otherwise. And let's keep the conversation. And I hope that becomes the discussion even as
Going
we go to
forward.
elections.
That's a very good one. Asante sana. On a very good note to end this conversation this morning, Dr. Abraham Rugo is the country manager at the International Budget Partnerships. We have been having this conversation about debt management, budget management, and the supplementary budget.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.